We are live. Greetings, fellow Earthlings. Welcome to Maynard Saves and Math Pig. I see you there in the live chat. Spooky Bed here, and Richard Madsen stopped by to leave a very nice message for me and Drag. And that is my guest today on episode 5 of the Amateur Conversationalist, Dragnauct Sylvas. Welcome, Drag. And you're muted.
Okay, yes, thank you for having me. It's easier when we're live and I can see the reverberation or whatever the thing is around my icon. I'm still getting used to that. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me.
Well, and no, that's odd because on my end, I can see your icon, pulsating, when you talk. So I'm not sure why it doesn't show on your end. But I do want to mention right off the bat that this episode is going to be a little different than my previous 4 episodes. In the previous 4 episodes, we talked to individuals from the community, and we, learned about things about them that maybe the community at large might not know about. Last week we had Barney Tearspell on, and he talked about his avocation of Kyudo, Japanese archery. And we had Nakasuchi on a few weeks ago, and we talked about his time as a slam poet. Now, when I approached Drag about this, and I said, Drag, what thing about you, maybe that the community doesn't know about, something you do in your life and he really couldn't think of anything. He said he's been around the community for a while. Everybody, knows about him and the things he does. And, if you look at the thumbnail I put up, I copied his Twitter homepage as a thumbnail for this today, and he lists right there a lot of the things in his life, amateur fisherman, father, the fact that he's going to school for his biology degree and everything. But he's a kind of an open book in the community, I guess, as it were. And, as a matter of fact, like he just did a stream, I think it was last night or the night before, where he was out at a bar with his wife and a few other people in the community and having some beers and talking. And, so he's definitely out there as far as a community member and letting people know what his life's all about. So today what we're going to do is, since I'm the amateur conversationalist, and I look at Drag as, maybe he wouldn't identify himself as a professional conversation. He is certainly a lot further along on the spectrum than I am. I met Drag a few months back, maybe as many as 6 months ago now, in one of Nakasuchi's streams. Him and Saka came on, and that was where I first met the two of them. And so we're just going to have a conversation about having conversations and how Drag does it and how maybe where I can improve. Normally with these, I would come in here with a couple pages of notes and questions. And, as I said to Drag earlier, it would look like, a Mel Gibson wall chart from the movie Conspiracy Theory. Today, I've just come in to, have a discussion with Drag like I've done many, many times with him on Discord. And we'll just see how it goes. So, Drag, why don't you start for a minute? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like when I've seen you have, conversations and discussions with people, and at this moment, I'm specifically talking about like where you're having a discussion with somebody that maybe you disagree with on a point, like when I've seen you talk to, different theists and that, you seem to have your own brand of the Socratic method. Is that a correct statement on my part?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I basically, if people are wondering, John is absolutely right. I tried my best to employ the Socratic method, but there's different, I guess you could say, styles or ways that people can do so. You can kind of go into it with, I guess, a more, I don't want to call it dishonest, but a less charitable view of the person that you're talking to, and simply try to find ways to maybe pigeonhole them into a position that you find that is easy for you to attack. But for me, I've moved away from that, because at one point in time, that's essentially what myself and others would do, because that was from the era of YouTube in which we are from, the ponage era. And there was a shift from that to simply trying to suss out what the other person is saying. If you want to have an enriching conversation with people, it's best that you fully understand what they're trying to get across to you and the way that they are trying to express it. And when you invest yourself in that practice, you find that the conversations are much better. And I've seen an improvement in the conversations that I've had over the years, uh, by me employing this technique, even when the conversation has kind of gone off the rails, for me to kind of take a step back and say that, well, maybe I do understand what this person is saying. And usually it is something along the lines of, they have a specific way that they want to define something, which is fine, right? Understanding the concept behind what they're saying is more important. So I can, seed ground on that point, if it'll help further the conversation along. And I think that it's a practice that I would suggest other people try to employ in their conversations, because it actually reminds me of a dictum that Ozzy has, is that we all get the conversations that we deserve. If you go into the conversation simply trying to pwn the other person, then you're probably not going to have the best conversation. But if you go into the conversation understanding that the person that you're talking to may not have the ability to articulate something a particular way, but they're right on the money with it, you may find that your questions are received a bit better. You may find that the conversation is a bit more enriching. You may feel edified at the end of it, rather than frustrated because you've now wasted time trying to talk to someone who's now angry at you.
Well, and I've noticed too that a lot of times when I've seen you having interactions with people is that you'll ask questions, but then you'll let them talk. You'll let them make their point, and then you'll pick the right spots to interject. I noticed you guys just rebooted the Magic Sandwich Show, and I watched that conversation, of that debate between Aaron Ra and I can't remember the other fellow's name, Aaron something.
Aaron White.
Right, and at one point I had posted in the live chat that yeah, let Aaron talk. That's the best indictment of his ideas, is to allow him to talk.
Yeah, that's something that if you've ever interacted with Aaron, he likes to talk. That's true in person as well as online, and he is definitely, he can take control of a room very easily, and he knows it. He has a very powerful voice, and so do I. But Aaron and I have a bit of a different way of kind of approaching things, because I can be very forceful. But I'm looking for salsa, dear. But I am,
You're all
I
right.
yeah. So I tend to pick and choose when that forcefulness comes out, and depending on how many drinks Aaron has, that may be kind of like the mainstay of the conversation. And much to the chagrin of other people, but that's his style, right? I don't really begrudge him, because that's how he gets his points across. But you kind of know who you're dealing with when you go into that conversation. But likewise, people don't like the technique that you've referenced earlier, where I will ask them questions. Some people actually get mad because I want them to clarify and specify what they say, because yeah, there is an intention behind me doing that. That is me taking generally taking vagaries and turning them into something tangible, so I have something to work with. Because if I'm to critique your position, I would rather critique an accurate depiction of whatever it is that you're saying, rather than what I think it is, because that's just going to breed crosstalk, right? And when you are trying to get to something that is a bit of a touchy or controversial topic, it is best that having those terms clearly defined before you go in, because later on it's going to be really hard to try to really like backtrack, and uh, it comes across as backpedaling, to an audience, and people don't want that. People don't want to have to backtrack or lose face. So going forward with your best foot forward is something that I aim for. It might
Well,
help.
and it sounds like you're not just saying your best foot forward, but you want your interlocutor to be putting their best foot forward as well, so that you're not, arguing against a position that they really don't mean.
Right, right. And because what some people will do, and this is kind of a feature still even now, you'll see people offer very vague statements at the beginning of a conversation, and then they'll claim that you've equivocated a point that they've made, or a particular phrase or statement, I should say term that they made, like a good one is faith. Right. So when we're having these religious conversations, you will hear the word faith equivocated for, just trust and confidence in a claim or a proposition or whatever, versus a religious faith in a deity. Those are two very distinct concepts, but they're both in reference to the word faith. And if you, on the onset, are criticizing religious faith, that second definition, and your interlocutor is going along with it, and then later on in the conversation, they change it to, well, just that trust and confidence, like the same trust and confidence that your chair under you, or, will support your weight, then they make you seem irrational, right? Because then they go, oh, you agreed up until this point, but now you want to question it. Well, that can be avoided if you pin down very early on what you're referring to. And that's kind of what I mean by putting your best foot forward, because having to try and go back and address that does take away from what you're trying to get across, even though somebody who is very charitable to you probably wouldn't lead you down that road. But it sometimes happens inadvertently because people get confused. That's how conversations work, just free flow of ideas. And it's something that makes you uncomfortable if you're in that position, because I've had to do that. I think I mentioned in my last discussion on Sirius's channel that I had to, actually backtrack some of the things that I've said when I was discussing things with Brett Keane, of all people, and Nephilim Free, back before I understood, the gotcha questions and that sort of thing. And it really does take away from what you're trying to get across, because it appears as though you are now trying to recoup some losses, or save some face that you've lost there for the audience.
Well, I mean, to me, it sounds like you're describing intellectual honesty. You call it backtracking, but if you feel as if you put yourself out there on a particular point and then realize you're wrong, it's just intellectually honest to correct yourself. And
it is
called a backtrack. One thing that, I think that some of the people that you've had conversations with where it was, for lack of a better term, adversarial, because you were on two different sides of an issue. I don't think that many of these people would feel this way, but I think what you're talking about is that you try and you have that sense of charity to your interlocutor. You want to steel man their arguments as opposed to straw man them. And, going back to when I mentioned the episode of the Magic Sandwich Show, like you said, Aaron has his method, but I would say that that's the difference between you and he. When he disagrees with someone on a particular issue, he doesn't seem to have any, and I'm not saying this pejoratively, but he doesn't seem to have a sense of charity for his interlocutor. I've never really heard him try and steel man his interlocutor's points. But I've heard you do that many times. I remember in a conversation we had on Discord one time, you had explained to me, and I'm paraphrasing what you said here, but you had said, well, yeah, you can go into a conversation with that kind of gotcha attitude and, call somebody out who maybe is using a term incorrectly. But instead of, doing the gotcha thing, then talk to that person and find out how they're using a particular term, be charitable to them so that the conversation can continue instead of it being, like you said, pawnage.
That's right, because I think the example that I gave is it was theory. I want to say it was theory, and I have entered, I don't know how many conversations online where people use the colloquial definition of theory. Even people who are, science savvy, You just use it to kind of, well, this is just my postulation, right? It's not an actual theory, right? It's not anything robust and scientific. It's just a turn of phrase. And if I sat there and just browbeat this person for 10 minutes about the proper usage of this term, that doesn't resonate with them. That doesn't really do anything other than show that I can posture online. And that's another aspect to these conversations that a lot of us know about, but not many people are willing to kind of openly talk about, because there are different, I guess, archetypes of people who are on this platform. There are people who are here because, you know what, some of them are a bit older, and this is their way of being social, and they just want to have conversation. There are other people who are fully capable of enjoying life outside the internet, and they are here to prove something to people. And every so often, you will see that Ponage era, you know, those habits from that time just kind of come out. And some people are more, brash when they do it. Some of them are more abrasive, and others are more subtle, right? Others will try to appear more sophisticated and more haughty, than other people. And you'll hear that in the way that they approach the conversation, whether they're trying to steel man someone's position or whether they're trying to demean and denigrate them. And it is always interesting to encounter folks like that, because they wear their feelings on their sleeves. And so while they're impugning other people's motives and propositions and whatnot, uh, you'll find that when it happens to them, when someone approaches them with or just point out that, this thing that you said is a bit illogical or just inaccurate, uh, tempers flare. And that is the one, immediate I win button in certain conversations. That if you can simply, incite anger within your opponent, then you struck a nerve, so therefore you've won something. And in reality, it's a hollow victory. And that's something that I used to take, great pleasure in. I can incite anger within G-Man. Well, a lot of people can. That's it's not something some magical skill that I have,
Oh,
but
great feat.
yeah, it's no real great feat. But if the people that I don't like are angry at me, that brings me nothing. That bring like nothing of that sort really brings me much joy, right? My success in life brings me joy, and their acknowledgement of it. But you know that's to say that, what, there is a bit of ego here with everyone. The fact that we are live right now on this platform speaks to, your ego and my ego. And uh, that is something that I've had to slowly accept, and to just to learn about everyone, and to how, I guess, how strongly of an urge do you have to simply edify yourself versus the desire to, um, I would say, seek affirmation, right? I don't know if that
Well,
makes sense.
no, no, it does, and it's interesting that you point that out about uh, geez, I can't. The word you use escaped me now. Our holy shit, man! I should have had a cup of coffee.
I just had one.
Yeah, yeah. When you were talking about our egos, yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that we are on YouTube right now speaks to the fact that we do have egos, and I never looked at it like that, but you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in my real life that keep me busy, but here I am on YouTube, broadcasting live. Something you just talked about a minute ago, I would call it one-upsmanship. Um, and not to call out specific YouTubers, but that's always the sense I get. The times I've seen uh, Godless Engineer debating with Kent Hovind, it just seems like a series of each one of them trying to knock the other person off their spot and one up them, and try and elicit that anger or make the other one look like an idiot, that type of thing.
And that's actually a really good example. And I don't think that, uh, GE should take that personally, because I think that's definitely a lot of what I do, in certain conversations, depending on who I'm talking to. If I find that, this conversation is not really going anywhere, and this person should probably be knocked off their pedestal, just to show you that you're not, that there's always a bigger fish. I'll do that, and I think it's something that's just ubiquitous to this platform, and maybe certain other ones, but that is actually a really really good example, because that is the pageantry that you'll see with Ken Hovind discussions. Is it's not that he's trying to put forth factual information. It's not that he's trying to edify people. He is simply trying to denigrate whoever it is that he's talking to and disagreeing with. That is a large part. I don't think I've ever seen a discussion where he hasn't done that. And that tells you a lot about his sense of self, like his identity is attached to that, being able to denigrate to people, and to being able to besmirch their credentials or their education, because that's something I can easily do that to him. I technically have more education and scientific experience than Ken Hovind, but what does that really mean at the end of the day? I'm taller than the tallest midget, so is that really an accomplishment?
Taller than the tallest midget. You're definitely taller than the tallest midget, Drag. Another example that I just thought of too is, and I've gotten away from even watching any of these, type of streams, because I'm so over like the flat Earth thing. But I noticed that flat Earthers, any flat Earther I've ever seen in a debate always attacks, the globe theory, but they never seem to make a case for the flat Earth theory.
Yeah, that is an interesting. Actually, isn't. Oh, here we go. That's actually interesting. You mentioned that. You notice that with flat earthers and younger creations. There we go. That is a staple of almost any of them. It isn't that these people have a robust understanding of these topics. It's not that they have any real, formal education or informal education for that matter. It is that they can simply poke holes at the status quo. They can appeal to a knowledge that only few have. And so because they have that, that makes them special. And it actually tells you a bit about them, at least in my opinion, with my armchair psychology that I like to do. But it's interesting to note, if you sit there, and I've actually tried this, just sit and accept whatever they're saying. Say, you know what? I want to throw away the current paradigm. How can I utilize what you're putting forth here? And in a similar fashion, right? So if I toss away the globe Earth, whatever, can I go about, constructing a bridge the same way? If I construct it using, your paradigm, will it still have the same type of integrity? And you look at certain applications like that, because that requires you to have a knowledge of structural engineering, or obviously mathematics, physics, and it is interesting to see the mental contortions they need to avoid addressing that. And once the rubber meets the road in a situation like that, you'll see them move away from it. You will see them obfuscate. And same thing with younger creationists. It's like, if I can't use uh, the theory of evolution, Darwinism, paradigm, if I am studying, you know, the changes in or excuse me, changes in kinds, we'll say that. How can that be informative if I'm studying the progression of this communicable disease in poultry, humans, and pigs, and other animals? So that whole process is integral for us to understand how the flu is propagated in the different permutations of the different strains of the flu. That knowledge that we have of you know genetics, right, especially population genetics, can't be transferred to what some of these guys are proposing, right? And so if that becomes a public health issue, And so you have to ask yourself, it's fun to talk about these sorts of things. It's fun to entertain them. But if you were to actually put some of these folks, and I'll just give young creationism an example, put them in the shoes of an epidemiologist. What can your young creationism do for the upcoming flu season? Can we apply what you're asserting here? And the answer is no. Right? It's the same thing with flat earthers and constructing a bridge. Right? The answer is no. So what is it that they're after at the end of the day? Because it can't be anything tangible, and that's something that a lot of us kind of have in the back of our heads as we go throughout having numerous discussions.
Well, and yeah, you have to wonder at a certain point what the real motivations are, and like for instance, I've seen you and seen other people, do what you were just saying, try and drill down and ask somebody like say a sky out to explain what their position is on a certain point, and then you get answers like, well, the same as yours, which is sky out is famous for saying. um, when it comes to young earth creationists, I don't know, they're preaching to the choir. They have certain people that believe what they believe. I don't think that that their motivation, that they really have any goal except to please the people who are like-minded. But then coming out of stuff like that, you get things like anti-vaxxers. I saw on Twitter the other day this insane anti-vaxxer, going back and forth with people, and just really seemed to have no knowledge on the subject at all.
It's funny you mentioned that, actually. uh, I uh, actually, is my mic on? Jesus. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I had an anti-vaxxer on my channel, but no one probably got a notification for it because it was unlisted, and I posted a link only in a few places. And I was trying to, I guess you could say, screen this person before I put him on another channel for a live audience, and it was interesting. Um, he wanted to discuss his position, and I put in a request from a friend to have the discussion with him, and I was going to try my best to moderate the conversation. And this other person was a physician. So here we have somebody. This guy has an AA and in business administration with I think a concentration in accounting, and he is discussing the LD50 of elemental mercury while not knowing the difference between the words organic and inorganic. Doesn't even have a cursory understanding of chemistry at any point. And it was very illuminating to me that this wasn't about the kids. It wasn't about public health and safety. It was about his ego. He spent most of the time trying to denigrate the person who has and is actively um, an MD, the person who is actively helping people in real life, 16 to 18 hours a day. And this guy was patient zero for the Dunning-Kruger effect if it was a communicable disease. It's very, very illuminating to me that he represents one of those archetypes that I've mentioned before as somebody who is on the internet pretty much to satisfy his sense of self. And it's almost a shame, because there was a point where I had to step in because he kept asserting that I was engaging in cognitive dissonance when my input on the conversation was minimal, and I had to inform him that, look, you can't actually demonstrate what you had just said. So I said, you know what, we're gonna stop the conversation. Where have I demonstrated cognitive dissonance? Oh well, you didn't say it, but he did. I said, okay, well then stop saying that the you guys and you got you all, because you've done that a few times now. And After a while, after like the third time that it charged me with that, I kind of realized that this is just a narrative. He's just saying things. And then once he was on camera, I could see that he was consuming copious amounts of alcohol, and he was very disheveled. So this is probably somebody who's mentally ill, who is an alcoholic, and he is the founder of an anti-vax group that other people think is some, you know, guru or sage or wizard when it comes to public health. I
Well,
don't
and,
think the people knew like who he actually is.
well, and it sounds like so he was just throwing out like a lot of buzzwords. Did you happen to ask him if he could define cognitive dissonance?
I'd asked him a few times because he brought up a number of fallacies. He could not name them. He had no idea about like the form, like whether they like small things, like whether they're formal, informal fallacy. He just knew the names of them, like a lot of people. Like he likes to wave the fallacy wiffle bat, but at the same time, begging the question, as well as just making a number of non sequiturs throughout the entire discourse, and it was actually pretty entertaining up until a certain point. And it's about 2 hours long, and it is he spent most of the time questioning because the person he was talking to was RSC, also known as verbal diarrhea, questioning his credentials as a doctor, and then went back to his group and then told people that RSC was not a doctor. What evidence he had for it? None whatsoever. Absolutely lied. Had no problem with spreading the lie and then perpetuating it further. And that was amazing to me.
Well, and just to mention another exemplar of the Dunning Kruger effect that I spoke about a few moments ago, Sky Out seems to do that, where he hears phrases and terminology coming out of other people's mouth, and then he immediately adopts that terminology himself without understanding what that terminology means.
Oh yeah. He is actually that's a really good example. I still have an email from Sky Out where he does just that, and he challenges me to repeat some lines. And if I couldn't repeat them, then I'm not as smart as I say I am. And it's very interesting because people usually don't posture and make it that obvious. But for him, he made it up. He made it a point actually to do that. And I'll actually let me try and read off a bit just for people's amusement. Here it is. What's weird is that that it's written in three different fonts, and that's just I don't know. Let me know if you want to debate again so I can whoop your ass like I did you in Sokka. You see, Sokka could not explain his origin of his epistemology. He said it's irrelevant. You don't know how your position starts, or if it's true, then you don't have an absolute standard, and everything you say is logically inconsistent when you argue from a false definition. It makes you look you're uneducated, and I can tell you are uneducated when you can't even read my words. If you can't read this, then you are not educated. You might think you are, but it's really not. Can you read this? I want you to say this on our next debate. If you can't say it, then you know you just hide behind words and insult when you get stuck and laugh when you don't know what you're talking about. Rational intelligibility of the universe, supernatural, existential, transcendented, intelligibility and intelligence, rational intelligibility of the universe, supernatural, existential, transcendent, intelligibility, and intelligence. If you can't read this, you're a dumbass that hides behind words and insults G-Man because you don't have a life because of your whack position that you can't even demonstrate. That is an
Um,
actual excerpt from an email he sent me.
And that right there, folks. So after hearing that, anybody that heard Drag read that, I don't want to ever hear you trying to claim that Sky Out is a Poe, because he is not a Poe, and that's proof of it right there. And the idea that within that screed of his that you just read, that he used the phrase rational intelligibility several times, is just the most ironic fucking thing I've ever heard. You know, something else too that I thought of, going back to the Aaron Ra and Aaron White debate on the Magic Sandwich Show the other day. At one point, Aaron made the statement that Aaron was basing his claims on things he couldn't prove. And then they got off on another tangent and never, Aaron never really attacked him on that until later. And then I put a question in asking, hey, specifically explain this, because what is Aaron hinging his claims on that he can't prove? And I can't remember exactly what Aaron said, but he went off on a complete tangent and kind of turned it back on, how Aaron was calling him out on certain claims Aaron was making, instead of answering the question. Well, wait a minute, you said that he's hinging his claims on things he can't prove. And then I think Aaron tried to pin him down on that a little later, but never really got an answer out of him.
Yeah, I think that might have been the question. I don't want to say that stumped him, but he definitely, there was a question that Aaron had posed, and it might have been based on yours, where he had to kind of pause and really think about that. And just to be fair, it was probably something that Aaron said just as a reflex, because he just generally thinks of Aaron as being irrational. So that could have been what happened there, but that happens, right? It is something that even I've fallen into, where I've flippantly made a statement in a conversation online. Oh, you know what? I should probably have a concrete example before I say that, and that's a lesson that I have had to take on board, because I've done that. I've put my foot in my mouth and I made a flippant statement, and actually it was on. There was one that I made on Nadia's channel back when Nadia was running her 24-hour hangouts. And I was talking to Shamos 999, and it had something to do with how slaves were forced into African slaves were forced into Christianity. And he asked me for evidence of that. And I thought, well, this is something that everyone knows, right? This is like, why is that even in question? Why is that contention? And so I was trying to, forced to try and find some evidence for that. But the way that I had phrased the question or the statement was that like over 90%, I gave some number, and that's why I tend not to do this anymore, is that I gave a figure or a number that I could not immediately substantiate. And so I had to end up backtracking the statement because that's something that I have to hold myself to. And he held me to that, which later, I believe it got addressed by someone who's far better at history than I am. But still, I tend to remember my missteps and my mistakes. And that is what makes you a better conversationalist, is when you can engage people civilly, in most cases, and learn from your mistakes. You can then grow. And if you aren't cognizant of the pitfalls in conversation with you, then there's no way you can actually get better. There are plenty of people who believe that the way that they approach conversations 4 or 5 years ago is the same way that they need to approach it now. No, you should always seek to improve the quality of your conversations. That you have to. That's the only way that you learn and grow. People who are simply stuck in their ways, and they think that, oh, you know what, I'll just maintain this and then I can just use this for anybody. They really don't have a strong grasp on how growth works, because would you apply that with your education? The same information you had in a field, whether it be medicine or physics, 5 years ago, isn't going to be the same information you have now, because our body of knowledge is ever growing. So, why would you approach this skill or this practice the same way?
Well, and you're reminding me of a conversation we had in DMs on Discord, and you were making this point, and I replied back to you that growth isn't possible without evaluating your performance. I mean, you need to critique yourself and be able to grow. You won't be able to grow unless you do that. Which kind of leads me to kind of what I find to be an interesting question. We'll see what everybody else thinks, but you spoke about when you first came to the community, how you, and I'm going to use a colorful phrase here with a lot of imagery, how early on some people that probably shouldn't have been able to do that kind of pushed your shit in, like kind of fucked you up. And then now you mentioned Brett Keane and you talked about Nephilim Free. Is there any story or anecdote you can tell us where early on one of these type people got the better of you and you did kind of feel like you were wrong, but then later on maybe you encountered them again when you knew more and kind of redeemed yourself?
Yeah, there's always that wonderful redemption story, right? So I've had experiences like that with Nephilim Free, with Brett Keane, even with Ronnie, believe it or not. Even True Empiricism, I've had that experience with. And actually, one of my motivations for trying to become better at these discourses has been the encounter I had with Ronnie back when someone named Suzuki Das was around. And so me and Suzuki Das would hang out as much as me and Sam. But Suzuki Das actually got a life and went back to school. So I let's see, the one that I can remember, I think I might have told this one previously, but I was in a hangout, and once it was Brett Keen's. I want to say it was Brett Keen's hangout, and Nephilim Free was in it among like probably 4 or 5 other people. And so Brett Keane was doing, oh, it's evolutionists, I think they came from a rock and a monkey. And so the monkey shut out a lizard. And so the lizard then crawled on land and said, hey, it's good on the beach. I think I'll lay some eggs. And out popped the ape Lucy thing, and it lost its knee over here. The same like hyperbolic nonsense, like that he's being funny, right? And it is actually pretty funny the way he depicts it. But it is insulting, because a part of that includes chastising people who are far more educated than he is, far more capable than he is, and can actually go outside. And it is to the chagrin of a lot of people who have respect for academics. And so me and all of my bluster, I went in because I was going to correct him. And sure enough, got caught in a gotcha question. And at the time, I didn't realize how loaded questions really worked, because I thought I could just, attack it on face value and then accept all the premises and then go from there and simply show him images from the Smithsonian that I had not previously looked at, but I had seen in passing. And so there was a very specific anatomical structure that he would mention. Sometimes it'd be when I say he, Nephilim Free, would mention the hip girdle. And he would also mention the locking knee joint that you need in order to be ambulatory. And when I say ambulatory, to move and reference to the way that we move now with all that. So just a quick rundown. The bipeds that we refer to as monkeys now are known as facultative bipeds. They can move, they can be ambulatory on all fours or on 2 legs, or just using 3 or however, right? But there is no requirement for there to be a smooth transition from being a facultative biped from just being, completely biped. And I didn't have that type of information back then. I didn't know. And so I approached the conversation trying to like fashion my own theory on how things work, and that's just stupid, and just throwing out all types of platitudes that I could not back up. And so I had, upon being asked for evidence as to what I was saying, I couldn't. And so I looked like an idiot. And that's something that it kind of sticks with me even to this day. Is that, you know what, I've had to, eat a bag of dicks on that, as Scholar Fiction says. But it is from those experiences that uh, I kind of sat down and reevaluated how I approach conversations, and that sometimes you have to just simply pick and choose what you're going to go after, and that the bulk of the information being brought to the conversation seems to be from the person challenging the claim and not the people presenting the claim. So rather than me try and find this hypothetical structure that Neffy claims has to exist, this transition from this type of knee to this type of knee, uh, how about Neffy, you present what you see as evidence for this hypothetical, union of structures, or whatever, right? But that's something that comes with time and experience. And that's something from my conversations with Ozzy and Hogtie and back then Suzuki Das and uh, a number of people, even DPR, that I've had to sit back and um, take some notes based on my performance. And likewise with Christopher Mouty, and I'll briefly mention him. That conversation that you saw on Nakasuchi's channel that I had with the NIFB guy some time ago, I actually sent that to Christopher Mouty, and so he is kind
Are
of
you talking about? Are you talking about Aaron Ford, the guy that wouldn't talk to sodomites?
yes, that guy,
Okay,
yes,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Thank God, I forgot his name. Thank you. I sent that to him because I was getting a lot of positive feedback on that video. From you and from Naka and from a lot of other people who enjoyed, I guess, me taking him down or whatever. But it's not that I didn't, like, agree with you guys or anything. It's uh, that's not the type of feedback that I want. And what I mean by that is that there were places in that conversation that were kind of stalling for me. And when I say stalling, it was hard for me to kind of press forward in the direction that I wanted to go. And so I needed a critique from someone who's had a number of experiences with conversations like that to give me feedback. And so I got some great criticism from him, actually more than I probably needed. And so that's something that I know now, having that, like, that ace in the pocket, right? Having that, or having a set of go-to people who can give you honest feedback, not kind, but honest feedback, is so necessary that it's almost impossible for you to become your best unless you have someone who has kind of helped show you the ropes and who is invested in you going into the direction that you want to go in. And so that is kind of something that I almost miss about having Google Plus around, because you could have an easily arrangeable network of people to disseminate that sort of thing to, rather than hoping someone subscribed to you and then maybe they're in your Discord or all this nonsense. Google Plus centralized all of that for everyone, and you have gotten feedback from a number of people, even people you don't know, that you can easily see, oh yeah, this person's connected with this person, that person, that person, that I know these folks know what they're talking about. So I can vet their input very quickly, and you don't have that luxury anymore.
Well, and that's and I've been around as much as I was in the beginning as of late, but that's a big reason why I started going to your Discord. I kind of look at you and Sokka as that for me. Any whatever small improvements I've made over the last several months, I owe in part to your and Sokka's critique. Um, Speaking of Nephilim free, I mean, you're just a bag of chemicals in motion anyway. So,
Yeah,
with every time, and the other thing about Nephilim that I want to mention is, now you talk about encountering early on. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you were to reach out to him at this point, he would not even interact with you.
no. So a lot of the folks from, I guess you could say, old school G plus, they tend to avoid me now. And it's not that we've had any harsh conversations. Like me and Neffy have had testy conversations, but Neffy has testy conversations with everyone, even Ozzy. But Ozzy won't actually talk to him. But it comes down to many of them realize now that over the years I've progressed, and this is going to sound really arrogant, but it's just a simple truth. Um, a lot of them has realized that over the years, as they've stuck to narrative and they've not taken time to really learn much of anything, they have effectively removed themselves from having any leverage over me. And I say that because if you like the landscape of Google Plus and the Google Tubes was such that you only had a handful of subject matter experts around. When I first got around here, many people didn't realize simply how educated Hogtie is, and I'm not going to tell anybody his level of education, but um, he does a really good job of trying to hide that. Um, because people, if people actually knew back then, they might not have engaged with him as much. But there were only a few actual scientists in the community. So it was easy for people like Nephilim Free to simply build a narrative on old science. And I mean decades old, science that have been corrected and or I should say it's more precise science that exists now. And the narrative that he builds is simply just antiquated. But if you don't have that education, then you don't know that, right? You hear him reference very niche things, coccoliths and these locking knee joints and these hip girdles and this lunar bukkake stuff. No one has actually taken the time to sit down and research this other than him. And so if you're a layman and you're just a science enthusiast, how do you how do you combat that, right? You're at a disadvantage. Likewise with Ronnie memorized subsections of the electron transport chain, and there's one transmembrane structure that he has memorized, specifically the ATP synthase. And so he knows just enough about that to trot it out in a conversation and make it his main spiel. So how do you respond to that when you've not actually sat down and looked at this thing, but you've not had enough experience to know that it's just an example of something nifty that he uses in a conversation? It's like a decorative centerpiece, right? And a tea party, right? It's nice to look at, but who's actually taking the time to sit there and look at each individual piece and admire its intricacies and laud its glory? But now is different. There's nothing Nephi can bring up in any realm of science that I've probably not already heard of. There's not a piece of his narrative that he has changed in the last almost 10 years. We've heard it all. There's no new piece of information because Nephi doesn't do new information. He doesn't do current information. He is stuck. He is stagnated. And so there's nowhere the conversation can go with him but down. Because the second he starts making some very obvious errors, such as calling the constituent parts of DNA amino acids rather than nucleotides, that's only going to compound the issue of him feeling inadequate. Likewise with Ronnie, there's nothing that he has really learned in the past, year and a half that he's been gone that is going to, somehow equal or even come close to the amount of knowledge I've gained from taking general chemistry 1, the lab, general chemistry 2, the lab, organic chemistry 1, lab, organic chemistry 2, the lab, biochemistry 1, and the lab, now biochemistry 2 lecture, and the research that I'm doing in a biochemistry laboratory, trying to synthesize essential amino acids that aren't subject to feedback inhibition, right? There's literally nothing in the span of time it took me to gain all of that education that he has done that even comes close to being commensurate. So any conversation that they have with me, they're at an extreme disadvantage, and they're not going to put themselves in that position because they're here to score points. They're not here to have a conversation. They're not here to learn. They're here to tell people that they are young creationists and that the people who, like myself, are professing the godless world or whatever, are simply wrong. Well, they can't do that unless they can score points, unless they can show that they know more than me, which they don't. So they'll find other people who are easier targets to engage with.
Well, you talk about not moving your narrative forward, not learning any new information. Boy, that sounds an awful lot like Kent Hovind. It seems like the same words have been coming out of his mouth for years and years and years as well.
Yes.
And and then you made the point about the person who knew something about ATP synthates and used that as their kind of to their one trick or whatever to pull out that they knew something about to stump people. And it kind of reminded me of Standing for Truth, who always, and I can't even remember what the point is. He's always bringing something up about
genetic entropy.
Right. Yeah, that's his. He always brings up, but to dazzle people with big words.
Have you ever heard him like try to explain what it is and then provide the audience with like evidence of it?
No, because he's simply reading a script. He's just reading words that he found. Yeah, he's not. He doesn't understand it. I'm sure. Not that I do either, but I can tell that he doesn't understand it as well.
Yeah, it's none of these guys are that original. They copy from one another, and then some of them have learned that they're the more obscure the information is, or I should say the narrative is, the better, because that gives you wiggle room. And with something like genetics, Standing for Truth has now kind of gone the way of Nephi and true empiricism, where Standing for Truth won't actually discuss in a free-flowing conversation the merits of his argument. He has seen now that when he's spoken to me and Sam and CRISPR and Rational Mind, that he can't answer very basic questions about biology, much less genetics. And so his speciality now is going into debates and then doing the same thing. Well, what he thinks are debates, and pretty much becoming the new Kent Hovind. That seems to be where the direction of all of this is going, and it's almost sad because, to some degree, a lot of us give legitimacy to these folks.
Yeah, there's Tom talking about an engagement he had with Nephilim. So, all right, we're coming up on the hour mark here, and I don't generally like to let these go on too long. I think we covered a lot of good stuff here. I just want to say how much I appreciate you, Drag. I always like to bounce stuff off you. And between you and Sokka, I feel like I've learned a lot of different things in the past several months. If you had one bit of advice for people looking to have these type of conversations and discussions with people that maybe they disagree with, what would that piece of advice be, Drag?
One piece of advice, that's interesting. Be open to criticism. If you want to have conversations with people, and even if your motivations are just to prove how smart you are to yourself, that's fine, whatever. But if you can't open yourself to criticism, and I mean honest criticism, then it's probably not for you. Too often do people come to this platform to think that they can prove how smart they are, when in reality they're probably as half as smart as they think they are. And it really shows. It shows to people who have achieved, accolades in real life, that because they feel inadequate, this is their way to try and make up for who they think that they are. And it becomes needlessly personal because this is attached to their sense of self. So if you so happen to fall in that category, it's probably best that you not engage in these types of conversations. But if you genuinely just want to sit down and say, you know what, I think that I could have done a better job than R and Raw. You know what? I think that I could have gotten in there with my knowledge and done better. Then cool. Like that's actually awesome. You should think that. Arn's not perfect. He knows that he, has things to work on himself. I could have probably handled the situation better, right? Everyone can think that, but it is how you go about achieving that goal is what matters. So being open to criticism, learning from your mistakes, and looking for opportunities to engage in with a diverse crowd of folks, and not simply staying in an echo chamber, are definitely, I think, some techniques that you can use to edify yourself.
All right. Very good advice. Yeah, and it's always tough for people don't want to be critiqued, so it's something you have to go out of your way to accept and to search for, in other people. Like, when you mentioned you sent that video off to, I forget the gentleman's name, to seek out his critique of how you had handled that conversation with Aaron Ford. So, all right. I want to thank everybody for being here. Tom 34B, Maynard Save stopped by, Math Pig was here, Spooky Bed here, and everybody else. Thank you so much for stopping by. I think this was a very good conversation, and I will be back here next Sunday with episode 6 of the Amateur Conversationalist. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
See you.
Wait, hold on. I do apologize. Do you have anything coming up, Drag, that you want to let people know about?
Oh, sure. I guess so. Since some of you folks here get a sneak peek, what, you should probably go and spread the word about John's channel here. But since you all are here, you'll be the first to hear the next episode of the Magic Sandwich Show. Is going to be in about 2 weeks, on the 27th. It's going to be going over the Second Amendment, and we're going to have a very special host. It's going to be Nate Brody, and he's going to bring his law enforcement experience and his experience being a law professor, specifically constitutional law, to the conversation, where we're going to feature some folks from our community, like Progressive Liberal, who has been already slotted. And we're going to have someone named Slim Jim, who some of you may or may not be familiar with. He is law enforcement himself. He is an avid Second Amendment defender. He doesn't believe in any type of registrations for any weapons, no background checks, nothing. He is full, and I mean unadulterated Second Amendment. And we are trying to get a slot for another person to engage in this discourse. And so we're going to have a nice little roundtable on the current state of the Second Amendment and what can or should be done.
Awesome. That sounds awesome. And I'll mention too, look for me Wednesday night on a Raging Atheist channel, and next Saturday on the Great Debate Community. And again, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you so much, Drag, for coming by and doing this.
Thank you.
All right.